Welcome to GPAT's Meet the Candidates. I am Dylan Godley. Today we have with us Representative Dr. Perrin Jones, a practicing anesthesiologist and the sitting State House member for House District 9 of the North Carolina General Assembly. He has been a leader of note in recent months, particularly when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Jones, it is great to see you. I'm sure that you would feel more comfortable in scrubs.
Maybe a little bit. Maybe
Just a little bit.
I'm getting used to wearing a suit, so I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
Undoubtedly, undoubtedly. Look, if you wouldn't mind, share with us some of your personal and professional background before you became a legislator, because you are, for context, you are filling the seat that was vacated when Dr. Greg Murphy was elected to the United States Congress.
That is correct. I was appointed to fill this seat in the fall of 2019. I'd like to begin simply by saying thank you for the time this morning, the time today. Again, my name is Dr. Perrin Jones. I'm a practicing anesthesiologist here in Greenville. By way of background and training, I am a North Carolina native. I was born in Greensboro. I grew up in Charlotte. I went to Chapel Hill for undergrad school, Wake Forest for medical school. I did my residency in anesthesiology up at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center in New Hampshire. And my wife, Laura, and I moved to Greenville back in 2003, when I joined East Carolina Anesthesia Associates as a partner in that medical practice. My wife, Laura, and I have been married now for 23 years. We have 3 wonderful children. We have had innumerable moves, 5 dogs, 1 cat, fish, turtles, you name it, along the way. It's been quite a run. Like many people in my family before, I was in the United States Navy Reserves for 8 years and retired my commission with the rank of Lieutenant Commander. I've participated in a number of medical mission trips, most notably a trip down to Haiti with St. Peter's Church in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake down there in 2010. And I've been really blessed and fortunate in my life. I'm proud to serve the people of the 9th District, and it's times are tough right now, but we're going to get through it, and I'm happy to serve.
Absolutely, and I think a great many of us, myself included, are grateful that we have a physician in office in the General Assembly in these times. And as a physician who specializes in anesthesiology, you've been on the front lines of medicine during this COVID-19 pandemic, and I'd have to imagine it as being dangerous work, because I want to say that one of the integral components of your work is performing tracheal intubations, and that's a pretty uncomfortable place to be, especially when you have a respiratory virus like COVID-19. What have you done through your work in the legislature to promote provider and patient safety?
Well, one of the great ironies of this is that I, like most of my colleagues in the field of anesthesia, are really kind of primarily more fly below the radar kind of people. So it's been interesting to see our profession and myself personally be put at the forefront of dealing with this pandemic. During the early stages, my practice, my partners and I worked with people in the hospital to come up with a number of protocols to be able to treat people with COVID-19 in as safe a fashion as possible. And I like to think that practical experience at the hospital level allowed me to go into the legislature and help deal with our state's response to COVID-19 with a real boots on the ground perspective. I was fortunate enough to be asked to be a co-chair of the House COVID-19 work group. That work group helped create the infrastructure necessary for the state to be able to deal with this pandemic in as good a fashion as we've been able to. It really gave the state the resources necessary to be able to put our best foot forward in terms of coming up with our state strategies. in particular, I was able to help create a state stockpile of protective equipment, which is the type of equipment we've heard so much about that helps keep people safe, when they're putting in breathing tubes, doing tracheal intubations, and taking care of people. These are the face masks, the gowns, the hoods, and the other equipment. I've also been working very closely with the Chamber of Commerce at the state level to actually be able to bring the production of that type of equipment back to North Carolina. I'm not sure if people are really aware, but during the early stages of this, being able to get that type of equipment was very difficult because much of it was made outside of the United States, and being able to repatriate or bring that kind of manufacturing back to the United States, and particularly back to North Carolina, is incredibly important. And I was also very honored to be able to work with my colleagues around the state to create a framework to be able to safely restart doing elective surgical procedures, which I think in a lot of ways helped give people a sense of safety with regards to being able to reopen other aspects of our society as well.
Absolutely, and very important work. No question about it. I mean, we had to, I think in coming out of the lockdown, the heavy portion of the lockdown itself, it was imperative to lead with healthcare, and that was a point that you
Yes.
had made. You had made that in late March and early April, and that framework was a very important part of that progression.
If people couldn't have confidence in the healthcare system, then it would be very, very difficult for them to have confidence with regards to other aspects of our economy, or being able to reopen schools, or really anything else that we would like to do to be able to regain a sense of normalcy coming out of this.
Absolutely.
So, being able to lead the way in that regard was really important.
No question. And reopening the state as a topic, it understandably yields sharp reactions from all corners of the public. Arguments have been made towards immediate reopening, status quo ante, and others have harped on a need for essentially shutting down the state until a vaccine is in mass production. So with that context in mind, let me run through a few questions, and I think the answers are pretty brief. First of all, why did we originally shut down? At the very beginning of the pandemic, why did we shut down?
Well, the original reason for the shutdown was for people to kind of get a lay of the land.
Right.
This is a new virus, and we didn't really know what we didn't know at that point. So tap the brakes, get a lay of the land. Ideally, that would have allowed us to flatten the viral contagion curve. So that's flattening the curve,
Right.
Which would presumably prevent our healthcare system from being overrun, which is what we saw in countries like Italy and in other areas of the country like New York. So those were the original goals of the stay-at-home orders.
Absolutely. I think the next question, since there's a sizable contingent of the population who are waiting on a vaccine, to your knowledge, especially since you follow pharmacology, which is important for the palliative treatments, but also for vaccine development as well, where do we stand to the best of your knowledge on the vaccine?
Well, obviously this is something that's ever changing. Mm-hmm. Every day brings something new. But right now there are several vaccines that are in various stages of the clinical trial process. There are a couple of treatment regimens that are being studied. Probably the one that's received the most press has been the use of hydroxychloroquine. I think that we need to study the use of that medicine more thoroughly to understand its real role, either in prevention of the disease or in mitigation of the symptoms. And one final piece, or one final treatment option that really hasn't gotten as much press as I think it should, is the use of convalescent plasma, which is where someone that has had COVID-19 and recovered from it can donate their blood plasma, which will have antibodies in it to the virus, and then those antibodies can be given to people that are currently suffering from the disease to help treat their symptoms.
Absolutely.
That type of treatment approach could lead to the development of what's called a monoclonal antibody, mm-hmm. which could be a very effective way to treat the symptoms of COVID-19.
We would call that progress.
I would say that's definitely progress.
No question.
Definitely progress.
And I guess my third question would be, what would we need to proceed? If let's say that because a vaccine can't be perfect for everyone. Some people will not be able to take a vaccine due to
And some
pre-existing
people will
conditions.
likely choose not to.
Right. So what would we need? What is one thing that we can lay down as a foundation for proceeding towards regaining a sense of normalcy in terms of policy?
Well, one of the first things that I think we need to do is we need to regain a sense of control over the situation, which is something, unfortunately, that I think we've lost. If we can regain a sense of control, that will allow us to help manage this disease from a position of strength, as opposed to what we're doing currently, which is having this disease manage us from a position of fear.
Right.
So if we can make that kind of a mental shift, then I think we'll be in a much better position going forward. Part of that, quite frankly, are the 3 W's. I mean, there certainly is a role for wearing a mask and washing your hands and the social distancing. But another part of that has to be a comprehensive, coordinated, statewide testing, tracking, and tracing program. And unfortunately, that's one thing that I think we're currently missing at the state level. North Carolina DHHS has received, I believe it's $337 million specifically for testing, tracking, and tracing. They received that money back in the beginning of May when we passed the COVID Relief Act at the state level. And unfortunately, we really haven't seen that type of a comprehensive plan coming out of DHHS, which I think is really unfortunate.
It is. And so what are the implications then of not having a formalized statewide testing, tracking, and tracing plan from North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services for the economy, for public health, and for public education?
Well, to begin with, it's my belief that we are going to see an economic realignment of the states. Mm-hmm. And the states that are able to most safely, reopen their economy, reopen their schools and what have you, in the safest, most efficient manner possible are going to likely be the states that are going to be the most economically powerful coming out of this. I have been very critical, not for the sake of being critical, but because I want to see North Carolina at the top of the list in terms of reopening our society and reopening our economy, as opposed to lagging behind. So the impact of not having a strategy means that we really can't feasibly move into a phase 3 approach for reopening our economy. We're going to continue to struggle with our public health infrastructure. And from an educational standpoint, we're going to continue with what is currently, I think, a less efficient and less productive way to teach our children, which is with the use of online tools as opposed to in-person learning. All 3 of those all 3 of those set the stage for kind of a lost generation of children going forward in terms of educational access and opportunity. And that's something that our state will struggle with for the next 5, 8, 10, 15 plus years if we can't come up with a better strategy going forward. One final thought on that is that without a comprehensive program, we really don't have an effective means to gauge the efficacy of our viral mitigation strategies. So
stuff like the 3 W's.
Stuff like the 3 W's or asking restaurants to close at certain times. And without that, we really don't have a way to know if what we're doing is actually being successful. So we're asking people to make sacrifices without knowing whether or not those sacrifices are actually yielding positive results with regards to containing the virus. And I think that breeds a certain amount of cynicism in some people, when what we really need is to bring everybody back together and get everyone rowing the boat in the same direction like we did at the outset of this pandemic. No question.
To shift gears a little bit, Medicaid expansion has captured a great deal of attention among the electorate, especially now in the midst of this public health crisis. However, a real concern is the potential for bloated unfunded liabilities and consequently higher taxes if implemented. Do you support Medicaid expansion? And if you do, how do you envision it so that expenses are responsibly managed, that more families are covered, and tax rates remain stable?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I know that it's an area of big concern for a number of families here in the 9th District. I do support what I would consider to be a responsible approach to Medicaid expansion. And if I'm given the opportunity to go back to Raleigh, it is my intent to lead a full discussion of all the pros and cons of Medicaid expansion. This issue is very complicated, and I would caution people to not believe that it's something that can be simplified down to a slogan that you might see on the back of a bumper sticker on someone's car. The issues at play, from my perspective, include increasing access to care for people, recognizing that there really is no such thing as free money coming from the federal government, that there will still be a cost to the state of North Carolina, that there is the risk that it could destabilize the current system, because you could have attrition from private healthcare roles, private insurance roles, to the Medicaid roles. And as State Auditor Beth Woods pointed out, there is some concern about financial oversight of the current system. So, again, my intent would be to lead a full discussion of the pros and cons, with the goals in mind of protecting the people that are currently on our Medicaid system, because those are the most vulnerable people in our society, and it's important that we're able to continue to provide this level of services for those individuals. Also, we need to protect North Carolina's finances going forward. We need to prevent destabilization of the current system, and we need to make sure that we have sound financial oversight. A final concern, just other considerations to bring into this discussion. We are, as a state, getting ready to go to Medicaid transformation. And the idea of expanding the Medicaid rolls while we're in the midst of Medicaid transformation, along with dealing with this pandemic, from a logistical standpoint, I personally think that could be very difficult. Those three things could be very difficult to deal with. As an alternative, I think it's important that we go back to the fundamentals, which would include growing our economy so that people have more access to better jobs with which they can, purchase their own health insurance, as well as, looking at some of the value-based incentive programs that North Carolina's physicians have really led with regards to accountable care organizations, clinically integrated networks, perioperative surgical homes, which are things that I think can save our current system a tremendous amount of money simply by increasing the efficiency of our care delivery system.
No question. No question. Moving on to another contentious issue, and quite frankly, what I would consider really since the end of the Second World War, the third rail of North Carolina politics, which is public education. What have you done during your admittedly brief tenure, since you have been in since late September? October 1st of 2019. What have you done during your brief tenure to promote K through 12 and post-secondary priorities?
Well, public education, public instruction is incredibly important. I mean, it's one of the things that helps make Greenville and Pitt County a vibrant community. It's one of the things that attracts people to this area, and makes it a place where people want to live, raise a family, start a business, work, etc. During the brief amount of time that I've spent in the State House, I've promoted pay raises for teachers. That included what I would consider to be a small bonus that we passed during the short session, smaller than I would have liked, but that bonus served the very important purpose of not allowing a pay freeze to occur with regards to teacher pay going forward, because once those pay scales are frozen, it's very difficult to unfreeze them moving forward, which is something that previous legislatures have had to deal with. I've worked very, very closely with the Pitt County School Board in terms of helping them to deal with COVID-19. That included being able to figure out a safe manner for students in the 2020 class to have in-person graduation ceremonies, which I think is an incredibly important milestone event in many people's lives. I've continued to work with them with regards to coming up with a testing regimen for the school so that they can safely offer instruction to students. At the next level, I've worked to bring funding for trade programs and things of that nature over at Pitt Community College. And I've promoted several different funding mechanisms to bring about a new building for the Brody School of Medicine.
You know, and let's talk about Brody real quick, because Brody, as it stands, is in a pretty old facility.
It is.
It's not the most technologically
It is
up-to-date,
not.
state-of-the-art
It is not.
facility, and yet we're still a leading draw when it comes to prospective medical students throughout not just North Carolina, but really throughout the Southeast.
That's right.
So would you mind briefly sharing with us the significance of a new Brody School of Medicine building for students, for the region, and really for the broader regional economy?
Well, you know, a new building for Brody is important on a number of levels. Not the least of which is that it really would be a point of regional pride for Greenville and Pitt County. Having a new building for the Brody School has been something that a number of people have worked on, Republicans and Democrats, for a long period of time. And being able to bring that into Greenville, I think, would just be incredibly important in terms of galvanizing our community. From a practical standpoint, a new Brody School will bring, I think the creation of the building itself is worth roughly $400 million to our local economy. And the idea is that it would probably bring in about another $300 million per year every year after that. So that the bolstering of our local economy would be very important. From a regional standpoint, expanding the Brody School would allow us to graduate about 40 more doctors per year. The Brody School has done a phenomenal job of having its graduates go into primary care fields, which increases access to care. And many of those folks have ended up staying not only in North Carolina, but also in rural parts of North Carolina, which is where it's most difficult to for our citizens to be able to have access to quality care.
Right.
So it's important not only from a local perspective, a regional perspective, but it really is important from a statewide perspective as well.
No question, no question. And kind of shifting out of a purely regional issue to one that has national reverberations right now due to the killing of George Floyd, due to a lot of the protests that we have seen throughout, really throughout the region, throughout the state, throughout the nation. Let's talk about criminal justice reform. Let's talk about policing. We're experiencing a moment of significant societal discord, which COVID-19, it seems to have accelerated. A wide range of policy prescriptions have been offered for policing and criminal justice reform. And so my question to you is, what is your framework for thinking about punishment versus rehabilitation? And what legislation have you advanced? Again, you've only been in the General Assembly for, short of a year. What have you advanced towards criminal justice reform? And also important, on the other side of the coin, the rights of victims.
Well, I appreciate the question, and obviously that's a very important issue that our society is now dealing with. I do think that the unrest has been promulgated by the stress of COVID-19, and so unfortunately that aspect of it is something that is probably going to continue. I would like to simply say that in my opinion, preserving our civil society is of utmost importance. And to my way of thinking, that means that there needs to be a role for grace, mercy, and redemption for people that have run afoul of the law. Because of that, I've been very vocal in my support of the Second Chance Act, which gives people the ability to expunge certain criminal offenses from their records, which would make it more easier for them to be able to get a job. I've also been a big advocate for some pretrial services to be able to help keep people, again, that have run afoul of the law to be able to get back on track and, again, rejoin our civil society. In point of fact, the House recently appointed a community relations committee that includes members of both the public as well as the legislature. I'm proud to be on that, and I'm equally proud that I was able to advance both Judge Marvin Blunt as well as Sheriff Paula Dance to serve on that committee as well.
Right.
And I think that will be a great way for us to move beyond a county-by-county approach to some of these criminal justice initiatives to a more statewide approach. I think it's important that people that are in our prison system are able to have access to testing, because certainly we don't want any kind of breakout of COVID-19 in those types of facilities. I've also been an advocate for different treatment programs for people that have either mental health problems or substance use disorders. And finally, and I'm very proud of this, I was able to get funding for a novel approach to prevent violence with, potentially violent encounters between people that have had issues with domestic violence in the past.
Isn't that Caitlin's Courage?
It is Caitlin's Courage.
Yes. And
that uses GPS monitoring to be able to give domestic violence victims an early warning that their attacker is within close proximity, so it gives them a chance to get away. And I think that's incredibly important. It's a very important way to bolster the good work that's been done by other domestic violence programs here in Pitt County as well as around the state.
Absolutely, and I think the other part of Caitlin's Courage as well, very briefly, is that not only does it help survivors of domestic abuse get away, but it's also a means for law enforcement to track movements.
That's correct.
And that is of vital importance.
That is correct.
Those GPS records being admissible in courts of law as evidence.
Yeah.
So to wrap all of this up, since we do have limited time,
sure,
and your time is particularly valuable since we've got to get you back on the front lines. You actually know what you're doing on the front lines. So Representative Jones, what is your pitch to the voters of Pitt County to send you back to Raleigh to represent us, and how will you uphold the best of our Eastern North Carolina values while navigating the challenges of public life and legislation?
Well, Dylan, that's a great question. I appreciate your asking it. When I was asked to serve in this capacity, I went to Raleigh really with two simple goals in mind. Mm-hmm. The first was to protect our civil society by treating everyone with the dignity and respect that I think that they deserve. And the second was to promote our regional economy so more people have the opportunity to prosper and thrive. All of the issues that we've discussed this morning, whether it has to do with criminal justice reform, growing our regional economy, funding for Brody, potentially expanding Medicaid, COVID-19, healthcare, education, all of those issues I've approached with the attainment of those two goals in mind for the betterment of the people of Greenville and Pitt County. If I am given the opportunity to continue to serve the people of the 9th District and the North Carolina House, I can promise you I will do my dead level best to represent their interests while I'm in Raleigh.
And I have no doubt as to the sincerity of that belief. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. We have had with us Dr. Perrin Jones, the representative for House District 9 in the North Carolina General Assembly. I'm Dylan Godley. Goodbye now.